amongst the physical therapy online influencer community, the fashionable thing to do is just yell into the void about another cut as if that's going to magically change it, right? The reality is we are where we are. That cut's coming down the pipe anyway. So maybe the first sort of deep dive we should probably go into is what do we do? Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Daniel Hirsch, a PT and the CEO of Risk and Compliance Analytics. Paul and Daniel talk through understanding the 2025 Medicare final rule, how to educate the public on direct access, and lastly, the importance of compliance and diversification. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
Kind of make fun of myself for this podcast because as much as I would like to think that, random, fun, cool people around the country listen to people like you and me chat, the reality is that our demographic is highly stressed practice owners, probably listening to this or watching this on YouTube in the dark at 2 a.m. while they're trying to balance their books. So I think the big topic, we're recording this here in November of 2024. What's top of mind for everybody right now is, Medicare final rule. 2025 is around the corner. Let me just kind of leave this super broad, because I know you got some thoughts on this. So what do we do? What is the practice? What is the average smart, stressed out practice owner supposed to do now? Actually, let's back up. You want to just talk really briefly about Medicare final rule and some of the changes that look like they're coming down the pipe, and then let's use that to segue into what do we all do about this? Is that a fair place to go?
Yes, great. Of course, I can start there.
I love it. Love it.
Paul, thank you again, first of all, for having me on. I love talking about this stuff. It's one of the things that, if people are waking up and they're staying at 2 a.m. and that's their concern, then they just need to click on better sites, in my opinion. The 2025 Medicare fee schedule is like, the APTA, they're doing a victory lap. Everyone's super excited about it. And it could be considered a big win, right? There's a couple things that have been in the pipeline for a very long time that finally took place, which is great. But I come from the mindset of, that's nice, but let's get going. We got to go.
Yeah.
So the biggest takeaway is that the expected proposed rule didn't really change. So the proposed rule, for the most part, stayed the same, which usually happens. And then the exception is things may happen if Congress takes action, which is always never what you want to hear. And that's always that retro, oh man, they're going to bail me out in January, February, which nobody wants to hear that. But a 2.8% reduction is not a good thing. Again, if you're looking at your margins, you're going, how do I cover that? Right? That means you have to do something different. The threshold for PT and OT combined, or rather speech and PT combined, is now 2410, which interestingly for the last 3 years, this is the first time it actually went down by a percentage, which usually goes up by 4%. It only went up by 3%, which is, I don't know what that means, but statistically, they're kind of jipping us a little bit. And that 3,000 other threshold, that's not changing until 2027. So that's kind of like a nice runway when people are thinking and they're worried about, oh my gosh, what can I do with Medicare? Not much, right? It's basically the exact same thing. In practical terms, I think, though, Paul, Medicare, they're definitely auditing when it comes to these numbers. So we have seen across the country, I don't know if people have been bringing this up in your circle, but the KX modifier is, this statistical analysis of the percentage of claims that people are applying to their patients. You have to know what this number is. So across the board, if you have a patient, 20% of Medicare, your population, that 20%, you need to know how many of your patients are going over these thresholds. And the reason is because you're getting compared, and you are getting compared to your region. And if you get swept up in it, you will be audited. And the only way out of the audit is you have to have an 85% passing accuracy to be released. So it's not like it sounds like jail, right? They actually release you, which is unbelievable. So, and these are multiple rounds that you have to go through, right? At least 3 rounds, and then there's possibly an overtime, and it's not fun. So very important, I think, that people understand that not a lot has changed. It's exactly what we expected from a dollar standpoint.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Well, so in terms of, I think you started to touch on this, but as you think about, so I was going to lead this into, what do we do as we head into 2025? You started to touch on this in terms of knowing your numbers, and I didn't actually realize they actually use the language of release, by the way, which is still kind of funny. Not funny if you're actually caught up in it, but it's kind of funny that they use that language. But in terms of what do we do about it? Is it, so let's actually break it up a little bit. So for example, you talked about the reduction, right? The 3% or whatever it was, 3% reduction or something like that. 2.8. See, I need detail guys, right? I'm just a directional guy. That's the problem. But so 2.8. So here's the thing, like I think you would agree with me that amongst the physical therapy online influencer community, the fashionable thing to do is just yell into the void about another cut, and as if that's going to magically change it, right? The reality is we are where we are. That cut's coming down the pipe anyway. So maybe the first sort of deep dive we should probably go into is what do we do? Is it, let's get tactical. Like what, should we be starting to think about trying to renegotiate other contracts? We got to make up for that 2.8 somewhere. Like, do we, I know it's kind of maybe taboo to talk about it, but it's like, do we change the way we think about our
No,
schedules?
we have to talk about
like
it because
I
it can't be taboo anymore. We have to talk about the numbers. A couple weeks ago, there was obviously a big election. I'm not going to talk politics, but there was I put out an
what?
article.
Really?
I put out an article. It didn't matter who won, right? That was basically the message, that it really didn't matter who won as long as you had a fantastic game plan in place. And a lot of people in my position have been preaching about remote therapeutic monitoring. This is an area where the numbers, I know people on this show have definitely said multiple times, you have to do it. It's been a green light for almost 2 years now to actually use. And enforcement almost never happens immediately, which is really, that's keyword for try it. Go try it, see how it feels, and then you can make a good informed decision of, what are you going to do with it? So from a revenue standpoint, that 2.8 goes away real fast when all of a sudden you could generate, on average, I know I've heard high numbers, but it's about $140 per episode. If you actually could apply this to your Medicare population, which automatically solves for that. Just with this, without doing any extra work. We're already doing this work. You could do it in-house. You could do it. I know I've heard different people speak about, people on medical leave or whatever they may want to do. And then when they come back, they want to kind of re-enter the workforce. This is a great way to say, let's leverage what we have. We've already done it during COVID. We already know what to do. Which, by the way, not to go on a tangent, but isn't that amazing that they're taking away telehealth?
right.
It's like, hey, by the way, we know for sure, absolutely, this works. We're just going to take it away unless there's magic at the end of the year again. So they actually were getting this taken away from, which, I have mixed thoughts about it. I think it's mostly because people just stopped using it and they knew that. But also because we were the exception. So they allowed us in temporarily into this waiver component to say, hey, by the way, you can also play in telehealth, but it's going to expire. And it's expiring now. So that's going to have to be transitioned if people are actually having a business with this. So people are going to have to figure out what to do.
I try to stay far away from politics, as far away as I can, although that's nearly impossible these days. But I think that's really more probably the expiration of that is probably more attributable to vested interests. like who stands to hurt the most if telehealth becomes, or remains? It's the in-person larger organizations that we won't name here or anything like that. So I think the flip side of this, or maybe the other way to say this, is that in my opinion anyways, the worst way to say this, the other way to say this is that the removal or the expiration of telehealth adversely impacts the poorest and the weakest of us, the people that can't afford to take 3 hours off. They can't get that time off from their health employer and then get in the car and drive over wherever, that's the tragedy of the whole thing. But anyway, I don't want to don't want to mess up your thought process.
I did want to finish at least with the fee schedule. So
Yes, please.
that was not the win, obviously. There were two big wins that I'm sure you've heard about. The supervision, which, in the tech space, I'm sure you're familiar with the carve out that everyone got last year for remote therapeutic monitoring, which was fantastically interesting. Never saw that in my life. And so now everyone's on par. Everyone's doing the same thing with general supervision down from direct for outpatient therapy, which again, just something to think about. And I know you like these kind of like pushing and poking type of things where like everyone gets the same degree. Everyone has, the same CEU requirements. The foundational knowledge is not different, but yet different parts of the therapy profession had different rules on how we were allowed to practice, which is very fascinating. Which again, I'm not familiar with other professions that actually do that. This is very unique. And finally, it's been released. So it's a nice big, you could sleep at night. You don't have to worry about this scheduling wise. I know people in terms of staffing, this is huge. This is very significant. You still have state licensure issues that you still have to abide by depending on where you're located. But from a overarching Medicare standpoint, huge win. This is really great. The second is the initial plan of care signature requirement, which I would love for someone to explain this to me. I read it. I understand what they're trying to say. I just don't understand historically how it helps us as a profession. I've spoken to like a lot of administrators who they're not changing their workflow at all. This does not help anyone because it's specific to the initial, right? So it doesn't help on the recertification, which basically says that you could throw out that very, very burdensome plan of care requirement. So Medicare loves going after this. This is one of their biggest, easiest things to audit. Hey, you don't have a signed plan of care on file. We're going to deny. Mm-hmm. So now this goes away, but instead you need a referral. And there's a couple details that you need. One is that you need a signed and dated referral in the record. And then also you need proof that you're actually submitting the plan of care to the referring physician or whoever that may be within 30 days. So it's very similar to what we had. It's just kind of like almost reverting back in a strange way that now we're actually under their control again as the physician, which we kind of need them to tell us what to do, which we don't. We have direct access. We're doctorate level profession. Very confusing to me. So overall, everyone's clapping and cheering. Great win for a signed plan of care and supervision, which is good to get a win, but it would be nice if the cut stopped.
I hope you don't mind me going on a little bit of a tangent here, but you just mentioned direct access, and it just reminded me of something I was thinking about. I was stuck on an airplane the other day, and the Wi-Fi wasn't working, so I was left to my own imagination. So direct access. So talk to me like a second grader here, or you can tell me to pass, and we'll just move on to the next thing. But direct access is one of those things where I think off the top of my head, I can't remember which of the subset of the 50 states aren't available. Direct access is not available, but as I recall, it's less than 10. It's like in other words, the vast majority of the states have some sort of,
Exactly.
So it's interesting because like if I were to take off my Strata hat and just put on my like personal hat, just personal Paul, wannabe athlete, borderline boomer, like all those things. When my knee hurts or something like that, my first instinct is not to go to the PT. It's to maybe schedule something with my, whatever my primary care physician is. And rationally, again, I'm talking in my personal capacity, not my professional one. Rationally, that's what I know. Let me go, schedule an appointment with those guys. But I live in a direct access state, and I just wonder, I wonder why there's not more like ad campaigns. So when we think about like the 3 and 4 letter, industry trade groups that are supposed to be representing this group that we all serve, I wonder why there's not more ad spend around, shaping that thinking. Like, how do we get more consumers, for example, to go to their PT directly on a more regular basis? So anyway, this is a poorly articulated question, but I'm curious, since you've been around the industry so long, has that sort of marketing ever happened before? Do you know?
Yeah, it definitely has. There was a Vision 2020 for the profession, and then they did it for another decade. And it was definitely one of the primary goals to get people to recognize that we are the providers of choice. We are movement experts, right? We own that. There's no other profession that can do what we do when it comes to movement. The execution of that we do a really bad job. We are terrible salespeople when it comes to explaining what we do. I can tell you when I need medical services, I immediately go like extreme. I'm like, I need and then I rattle off something. I'm like, there's no way I'm getting that. There's sometimes you need gatekeepers for a reason, but other times, either you need to control costs, I guess. But this is pretty low barrier entry stuff where it's not complicated. There's not a lot of risk involved, right? Physical therapists are, it's the safe alternative. There's a ton of research on this as well that says like we do a really good job. We're almost part for even just MRI, right? So just the utilization of imaging, we're really good at doing differential diagnosis. So as a profession, we're not tapping into that. We're not expressing that, but that's way higher than me. Obviously, that's at a professional level.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting, and I'll just say this, and then if it triggers a thought for you, great, and then if not, let's move back to the original topic, 2025. But you know, somewhere in this industry, it's become taboo to talk about money. Like somehow it's become cooler in this industry to talk about how thin the margins are and yell at all the powers that be about the inevitable cuts. Like that's become the fashionable and cool thing to do. But I come from the tech world where we got comfortable over the years, with what we call cohort analyses and things like that, where it's kind of like we know what a customer's worth, without naming names, for example. In one of our other businesses, we know that it costs about $50 to acquire a new consumer customer, and we know that that customer is going to spend something like $4,000 with that business over the course of 3 years. And that money is coming in at like a 30 to 40% net margin. And that's, if you think about that, if you knew that that was your model, you can spend money all day, $50 a customer to get them, right? And now to bring it back to
Or to
PT,
retain
just
them.
or to retain them, right? Yeah, yeah. So like now let's come back to like me, just personal me as an example. I'm in generally good shape, but I probably run a little bit too much. I probably don't pay attention to like my body. And I'm probably, off the top of my head, there's probably 2 times a year where like my knee or my hip or something is like giving me trouble. And every time that happens, that's probably worth $600 all in. If we just average, let's just use averages for the sake of napkin math here. I've got insurance and it's $100 a visit kind of thing. And let's assume it's 6 visits per episode. I know these are big assumptions and all that stuff, but probably worth $1,200 a year to somebody, but nobody's marketing to me. Like if I look at my junk mail in my mailbox every day, it's credit card companies, it's real estate people, it's all these things. And they're not dumb. They're not throwing away the money. They're advertising and marketing knowing that they can't tell when I'm going to change my mind about my credit card or my, whatever it is they're marketing. But there's still enough value in them actually spending that money to capture people like me. And yet PT and OT and speed, nobody does that. So anyway, that's more of a statement, maybe with a question veiled in there, but it just seems to me that like there's still opportunity here. Maybe this is like a business opportunity for like somebody that is thinking about starting an agency. It's like, how do you actually create like a legit marketing agency that only focuses on direct access? Like I won't name names, but there's like other agencies right now out there that promise to do pay-per-click and all these things. And that's cool. But my real estate agent, like real estate agents don't typically do that. They're still going mail, they're still sticking magnets on your fridge because they don't know when you're going to list your house. But when you do, like, what's easier? Is it easier to like go Google who should I list with, or is it the sports calendar on the side of your fridge that happens to have somebody's mugshot on it? And you're like, yeah, I'll just call that guy.
You will, because I do.
That's what I did. I've used the same guy for 4 homes over the last 20 years. And I don't know. I guess, anyway, that was maybe more of an aside, but all right, let's go back to 2025. So you were talking about, all that stuff. So we started talking about what to do about this 2.8% cut. And then you started talking about sort of the changes to supervision rules, which I think is really fascinating. And I feel like not enough people have been talking about those changes, actually. Maybe they're just not exciting.
It could be because it's a fleeting excitement, right? It's not something that, we've been seeing it. It's like a freight train. We knew this was coming forever. We've been praying for it. And then finally, 2024, really, it took this long. So yes, we're very excited. We're very appreciative. However, it's hard to stay excited about something like that where we feel like we've been
Yeah.
entitled to it also as a
Yeah.
profession. Like
Yeah.
we were sold on that years ago, and then it was like, it's going to happen, finally going to happen. And then it happens. You're like, okay, great.
Yeah. Well, I know this is a bad joke, but I know that like you love managing risk, right? So bad joke, I know, but here's the thing. So we're talking a lot about like what people should be doing to take advantage or to be prepared for these changes that are coming down the pipe. But maybe the flip side of that coin from a risk standpoint is, broadly speaking, what are things that practice owners should be careful about, with these changes coming down the pipe so that they don't trigger it. And you kind of talked a little bit about this when you talked about like the KX and the 85. And you started talking about this a few minutes ago. Maybe let's peel back the layers on that a little bit further. Are there, from your perspective, as you think about managing risks as a practice owner,
Yeah.
with these changes coming
And
down?
I'm going to give you an example of why you do need someone to actually help you with that thought process. And exactly what you talked about a second ago with you're worth something, and then you're willing to go in for something, right? You're willing to go if you're experiencing whatever it may be, but you're going to get a really bad experience if someone says, well, now you owe me a cancellation fee or whatever it may be. And the challenge is that A, is it really worth it, right? Is it really worth the charge $25 or $50 for that? And B, there may be a compliance issue with that. So I'm one of the few people that says, scrap that, throw that out of your playbook, get that out of your policy, because A, there's payers out there that don't even allow you to do that. And most people are not reading those contracts. So you may all of a sudden have a grievance filed against you, and then you're just playing cleanup. So it's just not good customer service to do that anyway. And from an administrative standpoint, all that time just adds up money for, was it really worth the $25 or the $50 to do that? And then you just lost someone worth $3,000 for the next year. So, but the strategic, I think, what you were saying of managing risk, I think all about diversification. So I'm a big fan of, allowed to do it, take advantage of it, because people are measuring, are we billing certain codes? Are we utilizing things that we've been, privy to now? So for instance, 2024, we were allowed the 3 new caregiver codes. They were written really poorly because they're going to basically add 3 more in 2026 to cover up for some of the mistakes. But they're worth money. So these are great codes to actually implement. I believe on your website, you did a really great job. Another good shout out to you for making it simple. For the APTA has the same thing, but you have to download the Excel. It's clunky. It's not so smooth. Yours is just like you put the number in, you say where you are, poof. You say the number of units that you
Oh, the
need.
Medicare fee calculator. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and it's actually also fed by real reimbursements. So it's actually, it's not what's in the booklet or whatever. It's the actual, yeah.
Right, because there you have to search for your exact region and stuff like that. It's not so easy, but the caregiver codes they're worth money. It's a great thing to do. They're still relatively new. So if you could capture, a 97550 that's worth $58 in Long Island, that's great. That's a great thing to do. And the patient doesn't even have to be there. There's a consent issue, of course, right now, but they're going to correct that because usually the patient's in front of you. So you can't actually build this code when the patient's in front of you, and they're going to solve for that in 2026. But just expanding and diversifying what codes you're selecting makes you look good, not just on paper, but you have more weapons to use and you minimize your exposure. So if you're just ramping up like everyone did last year on 530, everyone said, well, we're going to go and run this route and say functional activities is paying way more than everyone else. It got the biggest bump in reimbursement. Guess what happened? They're all getting audited now because statistically it didn't make sense, right? You can't go from a 22% to a 45% on your caseload of billing this. It's just not like gradually maybe that makes sense. But unless you just had a unbelievable good luck streak from a referral source, that's probably not going to happen unless you're doing that intentionally. And nobody likes these types of intentional playing with units and stuff like that. It should be always reflecting of what you're actually providing. And I think that's really, you've probably heard me say this before, the gold standard is always don't play the game, just accurately reflect what you're doing. So capture that in a meaningful way, and everything else will take care of itself, because then when you do get audited, there's nothing to worry about. All
right. From a risk opportunity sort of balance standpoint, I feel like there's 2 topics I've been thinking a lot about in the back of my mind, particularly as it relates to our product roadmap, but also the broader industry. So I'll give you two topics and let's figure out which one excites you more. RTM or AI? You pick one of those two and let's go down that path.
Which one excites me more?
From a risk or opportunity standpoint.
It depends who you are. I guess it depends who we're trying to talk to. If we're talking to someone who they have their act together and they have great workflows and they're operationally sound, then you should absolutely be going the AI route, because it's all about efficiency and it's all about transparency, and that could exponentially leverage what you're already doing. However, if you don't have your act together and you're a hot mess when it comes to understanding your KPI data and all these other operational workflow concerns that you may have, compliance is going to bite you in the butt, because it's just going to expose you exponentially to what you're not already doing. It's just going to compound those problems. And RTM,
Man,
that's part of the
Daniel, you
problem.
got like, I did not expect, I thought the risk guy would be like, no, stay away. But okay, keep going.
No, that's totally not my style. No, I love saying give it a shot, but do it right, do it well, put some thought into it, because RTM is, we have not seen audits that have been detrimental in any way regarding RTM. It's been the opposite. RTM has been caught up in other audits where something went wrong, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, by the way, what happened with this RTM content? We need that now. Mostly because they don't know how to build appropriately for it. So that's been the exposure, not the actual service.
It's interesting. Okay, so let's now we open a can of worms here. So let's just go down this path. So let's talk about AI first. And I was half joking, half serious, right? When I say I didn't expect you to be kind of open to it. I think I'm going to say this assertively, but I really do. I am curious for you to see how we spar on this a little bit. What's interesting to me is that a lot of the companies in the healthcare and PT space these days are just, the marketing team basically is just using AI as like the jargon now. Everything's AI, right? Now, technically, everything's probably just a wrapper on top of OpenAI and stuff, and that's fine. But we should probably talk about where the risks are in terms of HIPAA and PHI going to third-party systems that's not being openly disclosed and all that stuff. But the other side of this also is that I think in 2025, there is probably a 50 to 80% chance, in my opinion, that somebody is going to get audited about their usage of AI in the healthcare space, and the results are going to be disastrous. And I say this because as it stands right now, I'll just speak for myself, and if anybody wants to throw their own name in the ring, they can. But I don't want to out anybody. I've been noticing more and more of our customers behind the scenes saying to me like, "Hey, my business insurance just renewed, and there's an exclusion on AI usage." Or the argument is like, "Oh, now they just want me to pay for a different rider to cover the usage of these tools." And on the flip side, you look at all these tools that are out there, and we won't name names, but anybody, listening to this, you're getting targeted by ads for lots of different companies that are touting AI. But if you read the terms of service that are buried on the website, it's like that small fine print at the bottom of the ad and all that stuff. The indemnifications and the sort of legal hoops they're going through to make sure that their liability is limited to no more than whatever you paid them for that piece of software for all those efficiency gains. Something interesting is going to be happening in 2025, because all of these things can't be true. All these companies can't be so sure about the gains of efficiency and all these other promises they're making. They can't be so sure about all of those promises while also indemnifying themselves in very concrete ways, while simultaneously, business and malpractice insurers are starting to exclude or carve out AI usage. So something interesting is going to happen in 2025. I don't know what it looks like, but I do think there's going to be some big questions about it, because this whole thing has not been battle tested yet. When we think about AI in the consumer space, the risk of me asking Chat GPT or whatever to help me plan my kid's Disney vacation, the downside risk of that is essentially nothing, right? Because Chat GPT kind of says, hey, it might make mistakes. I think it actually says it right on the tool. It says hey, be careful, but they also say in their own terms of service, don't use this for legal stuff. Don't use this for healthcare stuff. It says it right there. And yet when I was at PPS 2 months ago, I feel like every booth on there, on the floor there, had something about AI, and it's just, I don't know. This is all poorly articulated. I thought it'd be interesting to kind of just get your risk, your risk perspective on it. Anyway, that was maybe more of a ramble, but any thoughts there?
Well, I come from the property and casualty space, so I love policies, and I think it's fascinating that yes, language has changed, and that's why you always every year, just like every other policy, you got to shop it. The language does change, the writers, the cost, all that. Just like when cyber all of a sudden was excluded, right? You always have to now have a standalone policy for your. People ask me, well, HIPAA's included. I'm like, yes, HIPAA is always included in your professional liability. However, if there's a cyber event, that is not going to be covered. Legal, those fees are not going to be covered. And that's why the applications are, 8, 10 pages long now just to get a cyber coverage. So yes, your point is this is untested water. This is something that is going to be very interesting. However, I think that's any different than Change Healthcare blowing up, everyone's, first quarter by kind of leaking the biggest possible thing that you could possibly leak. And then everyone's kind of like, business as usual. So I think AI is still very new, that both sides of the, the providers, the payers, everyone's still trying to wrap their arms around how could I benefit from it. So I don't think we're there yet that people actually understand, well, how do I protect? It's still pedal down, that people are still saying we got to keep going to learn more, as opposed to saying, slow down, how do we actually protect in the event of failure, in my opinion.
We're both probably pretending to be attorneys here for a moment, but let's just play with that for a second. Out of curiosity, I'm curious and again, the disclaimer for anybody listening, neither of us are attorneys, right? So don't take it, but just speaking in broad strokes here, I was just thinking about even our own business. I was like, wait a second, does our employee handbook specifically tell our staff that they can only use AI in tools that we give them? Like, otherwise, in other words, I just had this, like, my heart drop a little bit, where I was like, wait a second, is it possible that somewhere in our business somebody's using AI tools that we don't know about because they're trying to be more productive? Um, and then that made me kind of think, as we're talking to you, is like, wait a second, should one of the low hanging fruit for practice owners this year be like, hey, you should probably just make sure your employee handbook is kind of up to date, so you're covering your butt from,
It's one of the reasons why policies are supposed to be reviewed every year. People don't like doing it. It's terribly burdensome, and people don't know where to start. And just to segue to myself, I guess, that's something that we take pride in. We actually love going through policies. We update ours every single year. It's one of the things that you should have on your roadmap. It's the easiest thing to do. You carve out a week of time every, whatever it may be, second quarter. But there's a couple things that you got to do every year. And that's one of them. You got to train your staff, right? To your point, does my staff know what my standards are? You got to train your staff. And in healthcare, it's the standard. You have to, every single employee, doesn't matter if you're the CEO or just the person, opening the front door up in the morning, you got to train your staff on this stuff. And the argument that you used to hear as well is really expensive, and that's one of the things where I take a lot of pride in saying, you know what, it shouldn't be. It should just be as affordable as anything else out there on the market. And we've done that. It's fantastic. Same thing with the reference materials. You got to go through that. And if you're just relying on something that's on a shelf somewhere, that's not good enough. You have to go through your content and really update it to reflect what you're actually performing. And then also in terms of insight, you're talking a lot about insight, and you could only do that through auditing, to actually seeing what you're doing and saying, hey, by the way, what is my marketing team doing? Have I actually measured them against what they're supposed to be doing, which is supposed to reflect what the standards are set for them? And the answer is, if that's not happening, then you really don't know what's taking place. So you gotta be proactive, instead of a lot of people that come to me, they're saying, well, this happened, how do I fix it? And the answer is, it never would have happened if we had A, B, and C. But you can't say that, right? You have to say, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to help you out. But it really, it's that whole component of, I heard someone recently on your show say, parents don't take their kids, right, to therapy preventatively. They take them when they get hurt, right? Because you want your kid out there. You want them away from you, playing the sports in school, and you're willing to just ride it until something not great happens, because that's what parents do.
Yeah. It's interesting. probably need to I'm going to just make a note to look at our handbook actually, now that I think about it. The reason I was thinking about this also is because as it came up in my head, I was like, wait a second. I remember at one point at PPS, I was just floating through the floor. I just wanted to see what was out there. And I remember I just happened to be eavesdropping on, there was somebody, these two PTs were talking in the corner or something like that. One of them he said something like, oh man, yeah, I just kind of like set the record button on my phone. I like hit record when I'm doing an eval. And then like, and he said, this was like when the new AI tools were out and he was like, yeah, I'm running iOS 18 beta. He's like, yeah, lately I've just been like hitting record, putting it in my pocket. And then after they leave, I just like hit the summarize button on the transcript. And then I just copy paste that into my EMR. And I thought to myself, holy cow, whoa, this is, hey, if it works, great. But, in my mind, I was thinking, but what if like, are you actually reading that? Anyway, you're smiling. So you probably already
It's
like
not worth the
thinking
risk.
the same thing.
It's just not. There's
And that
so many
practice
things that
owner,
can go wrong.
neither of them were practice owners, by the way, right? So that practice owner has no idea probably that this is happening. And that's really terrible.
But it doesn't have to if you have other, things in place that you've assessed. And, we've talked, I've heard many, many times, there's so many ways to speed up. There's scribes now. There's all these great things and tools. Technology should be helping. It should be minimizing the burden that we're doing as therapists. But you could do it in a great way. You could do it in a compliant way, and it doesn't have to be like splitting the atom. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to be, you have to be proactive. And that's something where even something like, if you don't like what's going on, I'll give you an example. I hear all the time when I ask questions of, hey, what do you have in place for having a program, right? Are you doing certain things? Like, are you having an assigned officer? Are you having open lines of communication? All these things that like the OIG and Department of Justice strongly recommend. And then I want to ask them like, what about like a whistleblower, or you have an anonymous call line? No, we don't have that. I'm like, almost 100% of the time, we don't have that. And the answer is because A, it's too expensive, and B, they just don't think it's going to happen. And I don't blame them for thinking it's expensive. It is expensive and it's a waste of money, but it doesn't have to be that way. And again, that's something that we are proud of. We solved for it. It's incredibly affordable for therapists to do this. And people just don't realize that it's just not worth the risk. Put it out there, allow the opportunity for dialogue, and great things happen. As opposed to this, like, you're catching someone with the iPhone recording. Once it's in the cloud, good luck.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.